Begin the current Daf Mesechtes Bava Kama Daf Kuf Tes. Begin on the bottom of Kuf Ches Mebeis, 7 lines up in the bottom of the Amid, the first of the wide lines. We will continue with Halacha, the next Mishnah, continue on this theme of, well, we're discussing in this parak Hagoizel Eitzim, again going to one of the Avis Mazikim, that of Gezela, and specifically that you could have that even not only someone who actually steals, but even someone, a Shomer, who's watching it and he claims it was stolen, he also gets the same liability as someone who steals it himself. Turn to Daf and throughout the entire world. So we're discussing today's Daf are a Shomer who is Toyin Tainis Avad. So if, let's say he claims that it was lost, so it depends. If the Shomer swore falsely and then Eidim come, so he's only going to pay the principal, the halacha of kefil, when you make a claim to exempt yourself, is specifically, as we'll say in the moment, by Toyin Tainis Ganav. If you made a claim that it was lost, you're going to pay the principal because witnesses say that, no, you have it. If you admit on your own, that's the halacha when you swear falsely regarding a monetary claim. As a Shomer, you misham kerem v'chem mishvashim, if you pay the principal and add it fiv, and the carbonashim. Now, Toyin Tainis Ganav, on the other hand, which is interesting, Shomer Chidim is exempt for both Geneva and Aveda, but depending which claim he made, if he said that it was stolen from him, then if he swore falsely, Be'edim Mishamta should be kefil. He's not going to pay just the principal, he's going to pay also the doubling. And Hoidim Atzma is the same halacha, Misham Keren B'chem Mishvashim, if he swore falsely. The Mishnah tells us regarding a case of a Geisel as Aviv. Someone stole from his father. The Nishbala, he swore falsely, and then his father died. So what's the halacha of when you swear falsely and the person dies and then you admit? So Hariz Misham Keren B'chem Mishvashim, L'ban Lavoy La'echav. That, as we'll see, he can't hold on to any of the money himself, although he's also one of the Yershim. He has to give it to the other sons or to the brothers of the father. And some of the important terms and concepts are Mechila, which the Gemara is going to discuss. Why can't he just be Meichelit himself if, let's say, he's the Irish, where we know, as we learned in the previous Mishnah, that you can be Meichel on the Karen, and then there's no responsibility. Why can't the Irish just be Meichelit himself? Ha'reisha Gozla Ger V'nishbalai. The halacha of regarding if someone stole from a ger and then he swore falsely and then he encounters that ger, the Gemara tells us what happens if zakfa lev b'mulva or mace. What happens if then the ger says, okay, you stole from me, fine, you owe me the money, but now it's like you owe it to me, it's like a loan. And then the ger dies. What's the halacha in that situation regarding the payment of that loan that it is right now? Would he be chayiv to do the hashabas ha'gzela of the ger, which goes to the kohen, or would he be able to hold on to himself? Which Gemara brings the sources for several halachas pertaining to gezla ger, which is a special parish in the Torah, because the ger has no yarshim, and therefore it would go to the kahanim. And the halacha makdish de'achuza, someone who sanctifies his ancestral field, which also has certain halachas that if he doesn't redeem it and the gizber sells it, and then it goes to the kahanim, which relates back to the halacha of gezla ger that also goes to the kahanim. So we begin the current daf on the bottom of Kaf Ches Mebeis, on the first of the wide lines, where we continue with halacha, the next Mishnah, continue on this theme of a Toyin Tainis Ganav. Heichin Pigdaini. Let's say an owner of an object comes to the Shomer and he says, hey, where's the thing you were watching from me? Amalei says, Avad, it got lost. He says, Mashbiachani, I want you to swear to me that that's the case, because, if you're negligent or you still have it, obviously you have to give it to me. You're trying to claim that you're exempt by saying that it was lost. And he accepts the shvua, it's like he swore. Then, and then witnesses says, well, it's not true, it wasn't lost, he ate it himself. So the halacha is Misham Karen. He pays the principal, like Rashi explains. There's no chaimish and asham, because that's only if you admit, which it's written in the Parsha of Gezla, Ger and Parshas Nos, it says they're clearly bezvada. When you chayv for swearing falsly and then you were found out to be lying. Only if you admit. Here, he didn't admit, his witnesses came, so he pays the principal, obviously, because he actually did not lose it, he actually consumed it. Let's say admit on his own. Oh, that's with Allah, he has to pay the principal, because obviously he was not exempt, not only was he negligent, he ate it, and a chaimish and a asham, that's because of swearing falsely. Now, let's say, that's one type, that's called Toyin Tainis Avad. Let's say, Heichem Bigdani says, hey, where's my object? Amalei says, Nignav, it was stolen. Mashbiachan, he says, I want you to swear to me, and he says, yes, he accepts the oath. When witnesses testify that he stole it, meaning he really had himself, Masham Tashumi Kefil. Here he has to pay not just the principal, but also the doubling of that amount. And that's the same thing. If he admits it on his own, he pays the principal, the added fifth, and the carbon asham. The Mishnah continues and says, if someone robs his father, and then he swears that he didn't really steal from his father, and then umeis, and then his father died, and as Rashi tells us, after the father died, then the Ganav, the son, admitted that no, he really stole from his father. So it's interesting halach over here. He has to pay the principal, the fifth, to the sons of his father, or to the brothers of his father, if there is no other sons but himself. Now the question is, what do you mean? He's the Yairish, he inherits it, but still, as we'll explain in the Gemara, he has to do a hashavas hagzela, and therefore he can't even hold on to his portion of the Yerusha. He has to give it all back to be mekayim hashavas hagzela. So if there's other sons, he gives it to them. If there's none, he gives it to the next in kin, which is his father's brothers. But that is required for him to do his hashavas hagzela. Now, continues the Mishnah. What happens if v'meina roitza? He doesn't, whatever that means, interesting terminology. He doesn't want to lose his portion. The next part sounds more feasible, plausible. Or this son, this wayward son, doesn't have so much assets that he could just, forego on his portion. So what he does like this. Leiva, he borrows from others, and then by borrowing, he returns the amount that was stolen to his brothers to fulfill the mitzvah of hashavas hagzela. And then, now that he owes the borrowers, ubali chayiv, these creditors, boin v'nifron, they come and they collect from what was returned, his portion that he has in the Yerusha. For example, let's say there was two brothers, and he's the third one. So now, the creditor could collect from the Yerusha a third, and then whatever is remaining, what he borrowed, he'll collect from the guy himself. But they could go ahead now. He had to do a hashavas hagzela, but l'maisa, what was returned, he's also one of the yarshim. But he really can't afford that. So what he does is that he borrows, and then he pays it with them, and then they go ahead and collect it from.
That's not actually returning the Karen. It's not that's in Karen. It's like from somewhere else.
Yeah, it doesn't have to.
Does he have to return the Karen itself, or just the value?
No, yeah, it doesn't. It was money, whatever it was. It was money. Let's say, so he's paying up the money. But it's like it sounds like the way the Mishnah describes it. It sounds like that if he himself would pay it, like he wouldn't get it. That's how it sounds like. It sounds like that if he borrows it and that's his money that's owed to them, to the creditors, and then he pays with that, then they could go ahead and collect what's his from the brothers, which is his chelik of the Yerusha. A similar type of halacha is ha'imel b'nai. Someone says to his son, Kainim, I'm taking a neder, iyata nana mishali. You, my son, cannot have any benefit from me, any pleasure from me. Now, imes, the halacha is actually not like that. That's when his father's alive. If the father dies, his father only had in mind when he was alive, then Yerusha, the son will inherit him. But as a Gitin type of Koftesim and Aleph, let's say the father took a kainim, a neder, b'chayiv, ubemaitz, he says, son, you're not having any pleasure from me, not when I'm alive, not when I'm dead. So he's making his Yerusha prohibited on him. So imes lo Yerusha. If he dies, he's not going to inherit it. And b'yachz l'banav alachav, it's going to go to the other sons or to the brothers. Now what happens if let's say this son doesn't have what to eat? So what he could do is like this. Lava, he could borrow and eat what he's borrowing. And the creditors could come and collect from the Yerusha his portion again, because it's not like he's not really having benefit, which Chase discusses why is that not considered having benefit, but he's not having benefit from the Yerusha. It's maybe secondary type of a benefit. This guy will now collect what's really this guy's Yerusha. And again, the similar type of halacha, like to someone who steals from his father, where he can't hold back that. He has to do the hashavas hagzela, but Lamaisa is one of the Yarshim, and therefore, if he borrows from a Baal Chayv, the Baal Chayv could collect it just like when his father made a kainim prohibiting him from having hana, the Baal Chayv could go and collect his rights in the Yerusha. Now, the Gemara explains that this halacha that we require is the one who stole from his father. Rabbi Yosef, he says, if he doesn't find any other Yershin for his father to return to, we said like, okay, this son has to do Hashabas Exeli, has to give it to the other sons or to the brothers. Let's say there is no one else in the family. So he could fulfill it, he could give it a fillul arnikish al tzedakah, even to the purse of the tzedakah, and he shouldn't hold on to any of the money. He could even give it to the tzedakah fund, and then the borrower, the lender, could collect from the fund and fulfill the obligation that way. So he'll be doing the hashaba by giving it to tzedakah. Now Amar Papa, he qualifies also. He says v'tzarich sheyomar, that when he's putting it into the tzedakah box, he has to say Zeh Gezel Avi. This is the what was stolen from my father, and then he's doing the hashaba that way, and then again the lender could collect it from there. So the Gemara asks a fundamental question, which is going to take us a long way over here. You're telling me what happens is that the son who steals, he's got to give back the money, whatever it takes, to the other sons, to the other brothers, even if there's no, you put it, give it to a pushka, you got to give it back. Says Gemara, why? If he's the only Irish, it's all his. Why can't he pardon himself? Milay Tanan, didn't we learn the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Gimel Mid Aleph? Mochaloi ala Karen. We said, that was talking about in the Mishnah when we said you got to go even to Madai to return the money that was stolen. But we said that if he pardons him with the principle, and he doesn't pardon him on the 5th, then we said, he didn't fulfill the mitzvah of Hashava, then you got to go all the way to Madai, meaning then to go ahead and return it. But Alma, we see that to fulfill your halacha of Gezela, that we see that he's bar mechilahu. He's someone that you could do mechila on. Right? No, that's the saying. He himself. What? He's forgiving himself on his Yerusha. That's what the Gemara is saying. That like the way Rashi says, keep the Yerusha kamei nafla, since the Yerusha is falling for him, so then why do you have to give? What do you have to give? In other words, if you say you have to give the money, I could understand, says the Gemara, the Mishnah that says you got to do a Shavas Exela. You can't give it to yourself. You got to give it to someone else. But if mechila helps, so then you don't have to do an actual act of giving. So if he's the owner of the asset of the estate now, so why doesn't he just pardon himself?
He stole from his father, and his father died, then it goes to him.
Right.
So just like you met with someone else.
Right, l'chayre, right, exactly. In other words, just like then he would be able to do mechila. So why can't he be meichel himself? That's what the Gemara is asking, as we saw in the Mishnah of Kav Gimel, that then you didn't have to do any hashava. You didn't have to do anything. You don't have to go to mother. You don't have to do because if the guys.
It says he has to return the principal.
Right, but that's the Gemara was understanding was what the Mishnah was telling us. But based on the Mishnah of Kav Gimel, it says you don't have to actually do hashava exela. If the nigzal, if the victim is meichel, you could ask on that Mishnah, how does that work? But if we see from that Mishnah that mechila pardoning works, and it doesn't require Hashavas Exela, so then why in our Mishnah can't the son, the Yerush, the guy who stole, pardon himself?
Because it didn't come to his reshus until his father died. In other words, it was really not his. So he has to return it to some state before he can be yarshin it.
Why does it? But as I'm saying, why can't he just be Meichel himself?
Because it wouldn't undo the Gezela. It wouldn't.
But we saw that in the Mishnah that it does. We saw in the Mishnah of Kav Gimel that if the first person is Meichel.
I don't know. Let's see the answer.
Right. Okay. So it's actually going to be more complex, not such an easy answer. The Gemara is going to have a big machlekes how to explain what we're talking about over here. Amar B'Yechanan, he says, "Lei kasha." It's not a difficulty because it's actually machlekes tanoim. The Mishnah Daf Kav Gimel that said that you could be Meichel is Rabbi Yisai Galili. Our Mishnah that says you cannot be Meichel, and that's why you have to do extra, is Rabbi Kiva. What's this machlekes? The Tanya learn the Brisa. The pasuk about Midbar says that v'im ein lo ish goyel. If the man doesn't have any inheritor, lahashava asham, to return the principle of the gzela. That's how Brisa on the next daf explains. Hasham doesn't mean the carbon asham, means to return the guilt, meaning the principle. Now the question on this pasuk is, is there any Jewish person that does not have an inheritor? If he doesn't have a son or a daughter or a brother, there's some relative he has. Till Yaakov Avinu, whoever's the closest will be the Yerush. So how's it possible? There's never a Jew that won't have an inheritor. So Ella, rather, what's this pasuk talking about? Begez la gera kasam daba. The pasuk is talking about someone that stole from a convert and swore falsely, like it says in the pasuk, limul mal ba'Hashem. Because a ger has no relative. He's like cotton shanodim. He's a brand new baby. It's not related to his father anymore. He doesn't have any children. He has no Yerush. That's what the pasuk is telling us. If you steal from a convert and you swear to him that you didn't, and then he hears, the ger died. So he's bringing up his money and his carbon asham to Yerushalayim, because as Rashi explains to the Kehanim, because that's actually what the pasuk tells us, that if the person has no goyel, meaning he has no inheritors, which we explained is a gez lager, that says the pasuk, ha'asham amushav la'Hashem la'koyin. The guilt that's being returned to Hashem goes to the koyin, which again the Gemara later on explains asham means the keren. The principle that you owe is going to go to the koyin. Now, the truth is, he only heard that the ger died. But Upaga by Sager, actually on his way up to Yerushalayim to give the money to the Kehanim, he encounters the ger. He was still alive. V'zak fayalav. And the ger then goes ahead and, so to speak, stands it up. He transfers this, what's owed to him, b'milva. Meaning he says, don't worry, you don't have to pay me right now. You owe me the money. That's like what's called in Talmudic terminology, zakfalav b'milva. It like transfers it now. It's not anymore gezela money, which actually we'll see the Gemara right now assumes it's the same like gezela, but he turns it into like a loan, and umeis, then the ger ended up dying. So what happens is that the gazlan is now the muhsik. Whenever you have a borrower and a lender, the borrower is like he's in possession of the money right now. Oh, so zacha halah masha b'yadai. So that makes the one who's holding on to the monies right now, which is the gazlan who was on his way up to Yerushalayim, he's zaycha from it now that the ger actually dies from hefker. That's Rabbi Shloimy. That's Rabbi Shloimy. Again, it's one of these hald cup because it's not going to be simple how the Gemara translates this brisa. The Gemara is assuming one way right now, but this is Rabbi Shloimy. Kiva, he says, no, it's not true. He can't hold on to these funds. He has no remedy until the stolen monies are removed from his hands, meaning to be mekayim the mitzvah of hashavas hagezel. So the Gemara explains. This is the Gemara's assumption. It doesn't make a difference if it's to himself. For example, over here, where this guy is pardoning what he stole from the ger for himself. Because again, the Gemara is understanding that it's really like regular gezel that he owes, and now when the ger died, so there is no ger, so it's just the which is really what the parasha talks about when the guy dies, because if the ger is alive, of course you have to do hashavas exela to him. So now that he's dead, so he's in possession of the gzela, he's the muhsik, so he's going to be meichel himself. And same thing is when someone steals from his father, and he swears falsely and his father dies, where he'll be meichel to himself, which is the halacha of our Mishnah, basically holds that matzi machel. Meaning, evolution of lacherim, it doesn't make a difference if, let's say, a victim and a gazlan, matzi machel, there could be mechila. Now, so the Mishnah Daf Kuf Gimel that told us that machaloi ala keren, that the victim could pardon him on the principle, that was Rabbi Yisrael Glili. Now, it's interesting, and the Gemara is going to ask on this, but the Mishnah there told us regarding another person, there was a victim and there was a perpetrator, but the truth is, even to himself, that when you're fulfilling your obligation of the gezela, for example, let's say the guy himself is the Yerush, or when you steal from a ger, you could be meichel yourself too. And because the reason is, the Gemara is assuming right now that when it says zakfa is lav davka, as the Gemara is going to explain, it doesn't mean transferred into a loan. It just means the ger says, oh, you owe me the money, he dies, and then he could pardon himself. And that's the Mishnah of Kav Gimel, that you could pardon others. That's Rabbi Yisai Glili. Whereas Rabbi Kiva, he holds, no. He holds the exact opposite. It doesn't make a difference if it's pardoning someone else or pardoning yourself. You cannot pardon. So our Mishnah that says that this Yairish, this son, has to pay the principal, the fifth, to the sons or to some other brothers or like even the Arniki Shadaka or whatever, you got to get the money back, is Rabbi Kiva, which we're letting you know that even if the Nigzel himself will be Meichelim, it's not a Mechila. So, explains the Gemara now, based on how we're translating this Brisa by the Gezla Ger, that the Gemara is qualifying that Rabbi Yisai Glili will hold you could always be Meichel. And Rabbi Kiva will hold you can never be Meichel. I'll show you that it's not a stira between the Mishnah Daf Kov Gimel and the Mishnah Daf Kov Ches. It's a Machlekes Tanaim, as the Gemara says. Li Rabbi Yisai, according to Rabbi Yisai, who adin, the same thing really is, that Phila loy zakve b'milva. Truth is, this case that we're bringing there, Machlekes here in this Brisa, is even if the ger did not transfer it into a loan. Even if it was a regular gezela. Oh, so that's why when someone yarshans his father, also over there, even though there was no transferring that into a loan, and he did not fulfill his halacha, it didn't leave its halacha category of gezela when the father was alive. Once the father dies, and then the assets fall in front of him, he could pardon himself. Which, again, the Gemara in Amud Bey is going to ask, if that's the case, then Gezel Hager, that who has no Yarshim, that it goes to the Kahanim, which is a pasuk in the Torah, how's it ever possible? The guy can be Meichelet to himself. When are they ever going to have that halacha? The Gemara is going to get to that on Amud Beis. But, so says the Gemara, wait a second. You're telling me Rabbi Yisai holds that even if it's a regular gezela, that you could be Meichel yourself if you're the Irish, if you're the one in possession and there's no more nigzel anymore, let's say when it's a ger or his father and he's the Irish. So then, the Heidig Tani Zakfal of B'milva. Now why did we say that, that's what the words of the Brisa, that it got transferred into a loan. You don't need that. Even if it didn't get transferred into the status of a loan. Even if the Hindu had never met up with the ger and the ger just dies, even if it's just your regular gezela, he could be meichel to himself. Why would the Brisa say those words? Says the Gemara, that's like the Yacha Koichet Rabbi Kiva. That was just telling you the strength of the other opinion mentioned in the Brisa of Rabbi Kiva. Meaning, that even though you transferred its status from a gezela into a loan, that still he holds that you have no remedy until you remove the gezela from his possession. So he's that much concerned that you cannot do a mechila, even if it was transferred into a loan status, which is a chiddush, that still Rabbi Kiva holds it, but you have to do Hashabas Exel. You cannot do any mechila. Money has to be returned, even if it was transferred into a loan. So that's where the Gemara is right now, understanding to the resolution of these two Mishnayos, based on the Brisa that we brought, which is quoting this Machlekes Rabbi Yisai Glili and Rabbi Kiva, as Rabbi Yisai Glili explains, you could always be Meichel, whether it's L'navshei or L'achrini. And Rabbi Kiva, you can never be Meichel. So the Mishnah of Kuf Gimel that says there's Mechila is Rabbi Yisai Glili. Our Mishnah holds that you cannot do Mechila is like Rabbi Kiva. However, Maskela Rav Sheshis. Rav Sheshis has a question on this. He says, if that's the case, that even without Zekifa, without transferring, without having met up with the ger on his way to Yerushalayim, who, I thought you were dead. He says, no, I'm not dead. And don't worry, you owe me the money. It's like a loan. If even without that, Rabbi Yisai said it's halacha, that a person can be meichel himself the gezela. So then the question is like this. The Mishnah of Kov Gimel that spoke about the ability to pardon, to be meichel the principle, that Rabbi Yisai, you're saying, is that Tana. But since he holds that even for the guy himself, he can be meichel himself, so Rabbi Yisai Glili l'shamin l'nafshei. According to Rabbi Yisai Glili, you should tell us the bigger chiddush, like the case of our Mishnah, that he can be meichel himself, like when he yarshans his father. And that's the case that should have said Potter, and we should have said that's like Rabbi Yisai, and v'choshkin lachem. And for sure I would know that the nigzel himself could be meichel the gazan, because he's the victim, but to have the perpetrator be meichel himself, that's the big chiddush. If Rabbi Yisai really held like that, he should have said it in the case of our Mishnah, not the case of Achrini. And also the other way around. Rabbi Kiva, according to Rabbi Kiva, you should first tell me that even for others, that even for others that you could not be Meichel. Meaning, regarding the mission of Kov Gimel, that was a case of the Nigzel being Meichel, the Keren, that you told me is like Rabbi Yasi, it should tell us, no, that you could not be Meichel, and it should tell us, like Rabbi Kiva, literally the opposite. And we should have said that, the Mishnah is telling us, according to Rabbi Kiva, that even the victim himself cannot be Meichel. And then from there we would know, obviously, because of course we would know that he himself cannot be Meichel to himself. And according to this, when it says in the Brisa that Zakve B'milva, that would be a case of Acherim, because there would still be the ger that is being Meichel, and Rabbi Kiva is saying that no, Dulei Motzi Machel, that I don't care that the ger turned it into a milva, which is essentially really a mechila, because it's not a gzela anymore, it's like a loan, and then therefore the gazlan would be able to hold on to it when the ger died. No, you can't do that, and that's why Rabbi Kiva says you still owe it. But now that you're telling me that for others it's a mechila, and for himself it's not a mechila, because that's how it comes out. Rabbi Yosi Haglili's Mishnah that says you could be Meichel is only talking about by others. And our Mishnah, so to speak, that's Rabbi Kiva, that says you cannot be Meichel, it's only by himself. So says Rav Shesha, if that's the case, then you could say the Mishnayos are exactly as they're supposed to be, and then it's going to be one Tana, the Reisha, which is on Daf Kuf Gimel, and the Sefer, which is on Mishnah on Daf Kuf Ches, you could say is the same. Because notice that according to you, that you're saying that they're absolute black and white on their opinions, that he holds you always could and holds you always can't, then why are you saying it in those cases? It should have been the exact opposite cases. Rabbi Yosef Glili's case should have been our Mishnah, and Rabbi Kiva's case should have been that Mishnah, it should have been the opposite halachas. Should have said according to Rabbi Kiva that even la'achrini cannot be meichel, and Rabbi Yosef Glili should have said even la'atzmi can be meichel. That's not the Mishnah I said it is. So Elam Rav Shesha, because Rav Shesha disagrees, and he says, no, you don't have to tell me that these two Mishnayos are different Tanoim. Havaha, Rabbi Yosef Glili. You could say that both Mishnayos Rabbi Yosef Glili that we brought here in the Brisa. Ki kam Rabbi Yosef Glili the matzah machal. Yes, we saw in the Brisa, Rabbi Yosef Glili holds you can be meichel. When did he hold that you can be meichel? Is la'acherim, is for others. Aval lenavshei lematzi machal. But for himself, he cannot be meichel. As Rashi explains in the Masel Havaha Rabbi Yisi, this that the Brisa brought the case that Zakfei B'milva, when he meets up with the ger on his way up to Yerushalayim, that he transferred into loan, since the ger himself, who is the nigzel, removes it from the halachic status of gezela, it's like being meichel it to him. I'm saying, don't worry, it's not a gezela anymore. Oh, so that's a mechila. So therefore, when the ger dies, okay, so the gazlan will acquire it. And therefore, when you say the Mishnah on Daf Kov Gimel that he pardons him for the principle, that's Rabbi Yasi, because according to Rabbi Kiva, no, you would have to do a hashava from his own, like we learned. There's no remedy until you have to give back some type of gezela. And you could also say the sefer, meaning our mission that we're bringing here on this stuff, is also Rabbi Yasi. Because Rabbi Yasi agrees, lanafshay, for himself he can't be meichel, because the victim never removed it from the halachic status of gezela. Ella, so but then says Rav Sheshes, Amai zacha Allah b'masha b'yadoi. Why in the case of Gezla Ger, the case of the Brisa, does this gazan get to hold on to what's in his hand? Because again, it was translated into a loan. It's like a mechila la'achrini. But la'atzmai, you cannot do. So therefore, says Rav Sheshes, that you don't have to say it's a machlokes tanoim. You could say both Mishnayos Rabbi Yosef Glili. A third approach, Rava Amar, he says, no, you could say Havaha Rabbi Kiva. You could say both Mishnayos Rabbi Kiva. Because actually, according to Rabbi Yosef, no, he holds even for the guy himself, he can be meichel himself. And therefore in our Mishnah we'd hold that the Yerush does not have to give it back to the brothers or to the other sons. Because when it said in the Brisa, Zakfel of B'milva, which we were translating that as, he transferred it into now not Gezel anymore, it's like an episode of Mechila. It's not true. It's not precise. It's Lav Davka. So it would be, even if it wasn't translated into a loan, the guy himself could be meichel himself according to Rabbi Glili. But Kiyam Rabbi Kiva Dole Matzi Machal. When do we say? But how could the Mishnah Daf Kav Gimel be like Rabbi Kiva? I thought our Mishnah could be like him. Holds you cannot be Meichel. Doesn't the Brisa quote him that you hold you cannot be Meichel? Yeah, that's Lenavshe. Because as that Grash explains, even though the ger was, so to speak, Zoykev b'milva, as we just explained, that's not really a full-fledged mechila. So he didn't say you don't have to pay me the money. It's just, oh, you owe it to me. It's like a loan. But it wasn't a mechila. So it's not really ever removed fully from the status of gezela. That's where you're trying to, in that case, where now that the ger died, you want to be meichel to yourself. No, that you can't do. But if the victim himself to the Gazlin, Reb Kiva agrees that Matzi Macha, that you could be Macha, and therefore the Mishnah of Kuf Gimel could be like Rebbe Kiva. Now, as you get into Tamid Beis, now that that's how Rava wants to explain the two Mishnayos, Mechlal, the inference is that the Rabbi Lili saw, but the Rabbi Lili would hold, that even the guy himself could be Meichel to himself, even if the ger was not Zoykev Lav b'milva. So the Gemara's question is on Rava. If that's the case, Eligez ger the Kamarachmana. So when the Torah tells us, when you steal from a ger, Nesina l'kahanim, you give it to the kahanim. How do you ever have that halacha if you hold that the guy can be meichel to himself? Right, the whole halacha is only when there's a ger who has no yarshim, he dies, and you swore false and you stole from him. Now you have to go ahead and give it to the kahanim. But if you told me that when you're holding on to monies that was not ever yotzim mitaris gezela, that you could then be moichel at l'nafshei because he has no yarshman, you're in muchzik of the money. So then, when do you ever have the halacha of give? Who wouldn't be moichel himself and would give it to the kohen? If you what? No, but you don't need kapara. Mechila is enough of a kapara. You're not any better off of doing any hashavas agzela according to this interpretation than mechila. It's the same thing. You don't have to do that. That's what it would seem like. So therefore, when do you ever have this halacha? So Amarava, he says, what we're talking about over here is Kishagazla as a ger, the nishbaloi. So what happened was, he stole from the ger, and he swore falsely to him, and then the mesa ger, then the kamer died, and then b'hoid the lacha misa, and he confessed after the ger had already died. The be'idna, the oidid, at the time that he's admitting, Kanei Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu acquires it, because like it says in the pasuk, Hamushav LaHashem, what's being returned to Hashem, goes l'koyin, and therefore v'nosnu l'kahanim, and therefore he has to give it to the kahanim, because, as Rashi explains, he says, yes, if you admitted when the ger was still alive, so then you become like the ger becomes like a lender. So when the ger dies, he could pardon himself. But that's only if you owed it to him when the ger was still alive. If you admitted after the ger is already dead, then it's not the ger anymore. Then it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then Hashem says, okay, that I'm giving to the kohen, that you cannot go ahead and pardon it to himself. So therefore, this whole halacha, the regarding Gezal ger, is only if he admitted it, like we had the case of the Bryce, when he meets him on the way up, he says, I was bringing up, he says, don't worry, you owe it to me, fine, Then there's like a halva of the ger. But if he admits it, and which the liability only becomes after the haidah, the guy was already dead, then that goes automatically to the kahana. Now, the Gemara continues in a related discussion. Bayi Ravina. Gazel hakiyoris. Someone steals from a female convert, and he swears falsely, and after she's dead, he admits, which we said you can't be moichel anymore by a man. We said it goes straight to the kahanim. But what's the halacha by a female? What's the shaila? Does it go to the kahanim, or do we say that this guy could hold on to it? So the Gemara explains, because isha marchmana. The Torah says, im ein le ish goyel. If the man doesn't have any inheritance, etc., the whole pasuk it goes to the kahanim. Now, do you say ish means v'lo isha and not a woman? Or maybe no. That's the way pasukim usually speak. We usually speak in the masculine.
We had this question before.
Yeah, it is brought up. It's brought up in other places, the same question. Do you say that ish is dafka, or do you say that it's the normal way? So, I mean, it's brought up other places, and the question is, why isn't it brought up more times? But al kapanim, so that's the question. what are we doing at Ish over here? So only Rav Aaron, interesting name, Rav Aaron says L'Ravina, he says, Toshima, let's come here, Detan Yulit na Braisa. Ish, it says in the Pasuk, Ish, Inli Ish, I would only know a man. Isha, Minayin, how do you know the same thing applies to a female convert too? When it says in the Pasuk, Hamushav, that is returned, Harikan Shnayim. So there's two. Like Rashi explains, either it's because there's two times it talks about returning. It says Lahashav and it says Hamushav. So therefore, we're talking about two types of returns, a male and a female, or the Girs is not two Hashavas, but two Ashamas. It says Lahashav Asham and it says Ha'asham Hamushav, which the Asham is referring to the principle. So it talks about two times returning the principle. So that includes a female. So it became Atamalama Ish. So then what is the word Ish coming to teach me if it's not excluding a woman? So that's to tell you, Ish atatzarech lachza acharav. Only by a man, you have to go and ask and inquire regarding him. Im yesh legoylim. If he has inheritors, meaning if he has sons to return it to, im lav, or if not, meaning before you give it to the kohen. But a katan, a minor ger, that's not a man, you don't have to go and try to look after him, because you know he has no redeemers, because he was converted as a child, and Tais tries to discuss how do you even have gezla ger from a cotton. There's no schila cotton, it's only the only rabbinically, whatever. He talks about how exactly would you say that a cotton has money, but al kapanim, we're talking about where a child converted with his father, where according to everyone he could become a ger that way, but he's not related to his father. And the Gemara in Sanhedrin learns out from here that a child can't have children, so you know he doesn't have inheritors. So that's what the passage is just telling you, that if English goes, sounds like you already tried checking to see if he has inheritors. You know he has no inheritors, but a child that's a ger, you don't have to go and do any research because you know that it does not have any inheritors. That's what the word ish is coming to teach us. That it says in the pasuk in Bamidbar, which it talks about over here when you steal from the ger, Lashem. So who does it go to? It goes to Hashem, lakayin, to the kayin. Because if the man has no relatives, this ger, what are you going to do with the principle that was stolen? You give it to the kayin. What does that mean? So like we described, especially if we're talking about according to Rava, where the guy admitted after the ger was already dead, Kana Hashem acquires it. That's Lashem lakayin. Hashem acquires it. V'nosnu lakayin shabayis mishman. He gives it to the kayin in that group, which is when the guy is coming to get his kapara. Which Taisa explains not at the time of the sin, but it's the time of when you're actually coming to return it. But you know the Chavdal Mishmar is 24 groups, every week another group. The kahanim of that week's group is the one that you give it to. Says the Braisa, is that really true? You give it to the kain of that group? So maybe the guy who stole could give it to any kain that he wants to. It says lakayin, maybe any kain. Now, when the pasuk says over there that you have to return the money to the kain, movad elakipurim, besides for the ram of the atonement, which is the ashim that he brings, that he's going to get atonement for that. It sounds like whoever you give the carbon to is who you give the money to. Now, the Ela Kippurim cannot be sacrificed but a coin of that mishma, like it says in the Devarim Yudches, that the Kahana made up that in the times of the Nevi'im, that I do my week and you do your week. That the Kahana have their weeks, and only the coin of that week could go ahead and bring the carbon. So obviously when it says that whoever gets the ram gets the money, is someone the Kahana of that week's group. So therefore that's how we know who you give it to. Now, talking about in the Braisa, it gets a little bit more complex. What happens if the guy who stole from the ger was a kohen, and when it comes his week to do the avodah, he comes and he confesses after the ger died that he stole from the ger? Says the Braisa, how do we know that this kohen should not say, look, anyways, this money is going to be given to the Gehanim of this week's mishmar. I'm anyways in possession of it. Yehei sheli, so let it be mine. V'dinu, and logic would tell me this. Why? So there's two ways of saying this. If someone else, a Yisrael, a non-Kohen, would bring the Gezla Ger in this week's Mishmar, Hu Zaycha, I would take my portion with my fellow Kahanim from this week's Mishmar. So b'shalatzim l'kol shekain. So when it's his own gezela, isn't it all the more so that I should take the whole thing? That's how the Tanna Kama says the logic. Reb Nosson b'loshen acher, he says in a different version, and the way Rashi explains it is like this: Uma davar she'en lechelik boy ad she'ikanis b'rshusay. If regarding something that he doesn't have any portion in it until it enters his domain. So, for example, a kohen that's donating a carbon. The Gemara later on the Sugya tells us that the kohen could come and sacrifice his karbanis at any time that he wants to, even though it's not his week, and the meat and the skin is his, because the pasuk says v'ishas kadashim lo yiu, that a man, his own carbon, the kohen, that he gets to keep. Comes out that the people of the Mishmar have no rights in it. So, but a kashiyikanis l'shusay, so that's something that there's no rights until it comes into the guy's rishus. Kishiyikanis l'shusay, when it does come into the guy's rishus, he cannot take it away from him. Meaning, again, the way Rashi explains, is that if, let's say he gave it to a different kohen of that mishmar, then he can't take it away from him anymore. Like it says, v'ish ashayit l'kohen lo yiyah. If you give it to a kohen, he gets to keep it. So, if something that the kohen of that mishmar will have no rights to until it's given to him, for example, a kohen is bringing his own carbon, which he could, and it will not go to the kohen of that mishmar. When he does give it to the kohen of that mishmar, that kohen gets to hold on to it. So says Reb Nosson, this is the Kal V'chomer. So something that the kohen has rights in it, until it didn't come into his possession. Meaning, because if a Yisrael would have came and brought Gezla Ger to this mishmar, even if that Yisrael would have given it to one of the other fellow Kahanim, he would have a portion in it. So even before it's brought, Gezla Ger, this kohen has rights to it. So when it's already in his possession, meaning because he is the Gazlan himself, and he already has it, isn't it a Kal V'chomer that no one else could remove it from him? That's the way, again, the way Rashi says it. He says a slightly different way of what this is referring to. But Akabam, those are two ways of saying logic would dictate that the Gazlan, if he's a Kohen, should be able to hold on to it. And that's the price of Loi, no. Because if you're going to say that by regarding something that he does not have a right to, you're right. Your Kal V'chomer, your logic is flawed. Why? Because just like just like he has no rights to it, so too others have no rights to it. So therefore, once it's given to you, so who's going to stop you? But time of Begezel, what are you going to say by Gezla Ger, which is for all the people of the Mishmar, and everyone is claiming, every one of the Kahanim of that Mishmar want a piece of that pie, that just like you have a rights to it, so you're saying, if Gezla Ger, which when the regular Yisrael brings it, he has a rights to it before it's even brought, so you want to give him a greater strength from the Kal V'chomer. It's not true, because just like there you have a right to it, all the other Kahanim also have a rights to it. Ella rather, says the Brisa, the halacha is, there's no such Kal V'chomer, and to the contrary, this kohen, who's the Gazlan, he's admitting it in his own mishmar, the Gezela has to be removed from him, it gets divided amongst all his fellow Kahanim of that mishmar. Says the Gemara, why? But the pasuk says in Bamidbar, it says v'ishas kadashav lo yiu, that a man, his holy things belongs to him, which the Gemara later on is going to learn from this, that a kohen can be makar his karbanas whenever he wants to, and the meat and the hide of the animal are his. Seiroso, the ram of the asham, of the karbanas, is the kohen's, and he has all the rights to it. Now, since he's sacrificing and he has the rights to it, so the gezel should also be his, because we said Milvad Eila Kippur means whoever this is given to, this is given to. And since the carbon is given to him, so then the funds should also be given to him. So that's a good question. That if he has the rights to the carbon, so he should have the right to the funds. Why do we say that in le takana shiritim tachas yadai? Says the Gemara, my skin. We're talking about kohen tamei. We're talking about where the kohen is tamei, this gazlan, where he cannot sacrifice the ayil because he's tamei. That's why he's not going to get the funds either. So the Gemara says, wait a second. Iba kohen tamei. If he was a kohen that was tamei, then how could you say, when you were explaining your logic of Kal V'chomer, davar shish lechelik boy, something that he has a rights to it? What do you mean, mi islay? Does he have rights to it? But the Gemara in Zvachim tells us that a tummy person, meaning when you were saying the first half of the Kal V'chomer, we said if a carbon that he brings, that he has right, that the other Kohen have no rights to it. You said, but when he gives it to the Kohen gets sold onto it. So something which the Gez Lager, which he has rights to it before it's even given. So for sure he should hold on to it. But what do you mean? The first half doesn't make sense. If you're talking about a Kohen Tameh does not get any portions of the kachim of the mikdash, even regarding the hides. And Gez Lager is also kachim mikdash. So how can you tell me in the Kal V'chomer that something that he has a chelik in it, he doesn't have a chelik in it? So rather says the Gemara, the truth is we're talking about that, no, that Kohen was tar. So then we're back to the question, why do we take it away from him? The reason is because as we learn from Gzeira Shava. Asi l'kohen mistei achuza. We learn out this that it says it's given l'kohen from the halach of the ancestral field, which as Rashi points out, the ishas kadashav is explained in other types of cases, like when a kohen brings his own karbanas. But for this halach of Gez Lager, we learn out from mistei achuza, the time like we learn the Braisa. The Braisa says, regarding someone who sanctified his ancestral field. So it says that when the field's going to go out on Yovel, it's holy Lashem, it's going to go like a stei acherem. It says that it's going to go to the Kohen achuzasai, his possession. Now, Matam Eloima, what's it teaching us? Because it should have just said La Kohen Tia, and enough. What do you tell me achuzasai? We know we're talking about a stei achuza. Why does it say achuzasai? So says the Braisa, Minayin l'sad hayoytze lekahan b'yovel. How do we know that a field that goes out to the kahana b'yovel, meaning, like we explained, if someone sanctifies his ancestral field, in contrast to, let's say, if he bought a field, he did not redeem it from hektish, and then the treasurer of hektish sold it to someone else. So when it leaves the possession of the buyer, as all bought fields go out in yovel, it gets divided by the kahanim, the mishmer that yovel starts. Like it says, Vim lo yigal esasada, if he's not going to redeem the field, that refers to the original owners. And then the pasuk says, Vim machar esasada, if the gizber is going to sell the field. So the pasuk is lo yigal oid, who's that? The bailam, original bailam cannot redeem it anymore. Rather, b'hayasada, etc. This is how the Bryce is explained in the Bryce and Teres Kaim and Mesechtas Erechin. So, what happens if v'gala echad min hakahanim? In other words, what happens if the buyer from the treasurer was actually a kohen? And he's actually from the mishmer of the Yovel year. So a very similar svara to the Gez Lager discussion we just had. Minayin shlo yema, how do we know that he shouldn't say, since anyways this sanctified ancestral field that was sold to a buyer, the halacha is it goes out to the Kamen Yovel, I'm anyways in possession of it already. I was the buyer. So Teishali, and I'm also in the mishmer of the beginning of Yovel. Maybe I should just be mine. But then logic would dictate. Why? If someone else's field, when someone else bought it, I get a portion, I get a piece of the pie. When the Yovel starts, so when I bought the field, isn't it all the more so? The pasuk says no. The pasuk says that this ancestral field that was sold is like a cherim field, which is a type of hektish. To the kohen should be his achuza, and this is explaining why did say the word achuzasai, which it's a very interesting drasha that the Bryce is telling us. La kohen tiachuzasai is almost like a side comment, meaning achuza shaloi. You know what belongs to the kohen is his own achuza. This is not his achuza. This is just a field that he bought. So okay, so what's halacha? It's removed from his possession, and it's divided by all his fellow kahanim of that mishmer, and that's the Gzeira Shava we learn out to Gez Lager that says lo koyin over here b'stei achuza, which teaches explicitly that even the one in possession, it's removed to given to his fellow kahanim of that mishmer. So to be Gez Lager has the same halacha. Now, continuing on this theme, the Gemara says, "Turn about the Braisa." Minayin la koyin. How do we know regarding a koyin sheba that comes u'markav karbanaisav, and the sacrifice? I mean, we're clarifying what we mentioned before. And he brings his karbanos. Let's say he took a neder for a carbon, or he had a chatas or asham that was obligatory for him to bring. He could be malkav even not in his own mishmer. He could sacrifice a b'chol esa b'chol shosh yirtza at all times and hours that he wants. So where do we know this? From Tamalem, because the pasuk teaches in the Var says b'chol avas nafshi, he could come whenever his heart's desires, b'sheris, and he could serve as a kohen. Now, minayin shabedasa, how do we know that the reward of the avodah, meaning the flesh, The oira and the hides, the skins of the animal, are shaloi, that he also not only could do that, but he gets to keep the whatever is the food of the parts of the animal. It says in the pasuk Bamidbar, the ishes kadashim layu, which we referenced this pasuk earlier, that a man, meaning the kohen, his holy things belong to him. He gets to keep his own karbanos. So how so? So imhoya balmum. If let's say this kohen who has to bring a carbon was a blemished kohen, so he's able to eat, but he cannot sacrifice because a balmum could eat karbanos but cannot do the avodah. He cannot make a shliach to do the hakrava, whoever he wants to, because he himself cannot do the avodah, so he cannot make a shliach. But he could give it to the kohen of that mishmer. In other words, since he's able to eat, we call it ishes kadashab. So therefore, the avodah will be done whatever the kohen of that mishmer. But the meat and the skin belong to him because he is able to eat. So that goes to him.
He made a deal with the kohen.
No. He can't do the avodah because of balmum. So he cannot make a shliach. It goes to the count of that mishma, like any person bringing a carbon, because he has no rights to it.
Explain how he can say. He says to the kohen, "I want you to be makriv this."
No. That's not what the Gemara means. The Gemara means to say, since he's a balmum, he has no rights to bring a carbon. He can't do that avodah.
So what's he doing?
Nothing. It goes to like a regular person. You bring your carbon to the base of Mikdash, and the count of that mishma, do it. We're just saying that since he could eat it, because the balmum eats karbanos, so then he could do whatever he wants with that. On what? On the meat?
Yeah.
It says v'ishes kadashim layiu. He has rights to do the avodah and to eat and to get the meat and the skin. He just, because he's a balmum, in this case he actually can't do the avodah, so he can't make a shliach to do the avodah either. There's two things that he gets: doing the avodah, cutting the blood, spraying the blood, doing the hakrava, and then taking the rewards of that, which is the meat and the skin. Those are two things he gets. In this case, that is blemished, a blemished kohen cannot do the avodah. So he cannot designate a shliach either. But he does get the meat and the skin. He doesn't lose that because the balmum could have that. Now, however, it's continued type of kaviyur and aleph, if he was old or sick, and he is fit to do the avodah, as the Gemara explains later on, as Taisus explains, there's no psul b'kehanim midayraisa how old you are. It's only rabbinically because if you shake, as the Gemara says in Chulin, but he's not able to eat because he's sick or old, so then he could give it to do the akrab l'chol kohen shiur. It's any kohen that he wants to could do the avodah, because since he's fit to do the avodah, he can make a shliach, and it can be any kohen, not only that of that mishmar. But but the meat and the skin belongs to the kohen of that mishmar, because since he cannot eat, he cannot make a shliach to eat. So the Gemara just clarifies this: what's the case of this old person or that he's sick? If he's able to do the avodah, so then even the food should also go to him. If he cannot do the avodah, how is he making a shliach to eat for him? Meaning how to do the avodah if he cannot do the avodah. Meaning the Gemara is understanding it that it's both. That is he old enough? Is he young enough to do the avodah and to eat? Why is this discrepancy between eating and doing the avodah? So Amar Papi says no. He could do both under duress. He's pushing himself. He's already in the 90s already. He could do the avodah and he could eat. But avodah, when it comes to the actual service, when you do it under pressing situations, avodah, it is considered an avodah. And therefore, although he's not going to do it himself, he can make a shliach. But achila, eating, if he's going to eat it under extreme circumstances, that's what's called achila gasihi, which qualifies what type of achila gasi this is. But it's disgusting for him. He's too old. He can't eat the meat of the carbon. Excess eating is not anything. That's why the meat and the skin goes to the kohen of the mishmah, because yes, this older person, this sick person, to do the avodah, these two elements of doing the avodah and of the eating of the meat, he could do it al derech chak. But that's the difference. The avodah al derech chak is considered avodah, but eating al derech chak is considered achila gasa, and therefore that wouldn't qualify. And therefore, for the avodah he can make a shliach, but for the eating he cannot. Think it to any time. Those things.